What's going on, everybody? Brandon Schaefer here. So recently I got a question from a subscriber asking about transitioning from watercolors to oil paint. So let's just talk about it a little bit and some of the mindset you can take from watercolors to oils. So to begin with, I don't think you're going to have a problem, because what I've heard in the art community is like, before you jump into watercolor, you should use oil paints for 5 to 10 years and then begin watercolor, because watercolor is probably one of the hardest painting mediums. From just my experience and what I've heard, watercolor is quite difficult because it's unforgiving. It's so unforgiving. You put a mark down and it can be very difficult to erase that. You can't paint over it. You can take it off, but it's very difficult, especially depending on what stage of the painting you're in. Watercolors are a lot more challenging than oil paint. I don't think you're going to have a problem. I don't think you need to even worry about anything. It's basically just trying it out. And forgot to mention, the subscriber is moving to water-soluble oils or water-mixable oils. So you won't have to deal with any chemicals or any turpentine or solvents or anything. You can still just use water. The main difference is obviously it's going to be the paint drying time. So the paint's going to be wetter longer. You'll be able to blend. The colors will be more vibrant. Obviously, you probably already know this stuff if you looked into it, but I'm just making a broad video for everyone out there. If you're interested in trying oils and you've only worked with watercolor, these are kind of the differences you're gonna notice. With oils, what's gonna be the same is kind of you can have a layering process, because with watercolor, at least the way that I use it, there's a layering process. You start out with the lightest lights and you move toward the darkest darks. You can still do that with oils, and a great example is John Singer Sargent. A lot of his oil sketches, and especially his watercolors obviously, but you can look at some of his oil sketches and they look very similar to his watercolors in application, how he used the paint and applied it. You know, he puts like these darkest strokes last, but he also puts the lightest strokes last as well, or at least what it seems like last. And that's the difference, is like you're able to put more opaque paint on. It's kind of like if you ever used gouache instead of watercolor. If you've ever used gouache, I mean, it's very similar to oil paint because you're able to put more opaque paint on top of you know, transparent paint. So that's the main difference. I mean, other than that, I mean, you're not going to have any trouble. I mean, it'll probably take you a few paintings to get used to it because watercolors does handle so differently. Watercolor, you can be deliberate, but sometimes it's uncontrollable, just with the way the pigment moves in the water, and just with the way that it, you know, that it handles. But with oils, everything is pretty deliberate. You know, you put a stroke down, it's gonna make that stroke in paint. There's not much movement or anything happening with the pigment. You put it down and that's it. You know, colors are all going to be very similar as far as pigments and things. Yeah, I mean, obviously the layering process with oils, you can start out with a thinner wash and then work up to using paint out of the tube, and then you can use mediums with that, or just start out using mediums. And that way it's very similar to watercolor, because watercolor, you start out with washes and then you work your way to more opaque paint. You can do the same thing with oils. You can start out using water, thin down the paint, use these washes, really light washes, and then just work your way up to darker paint, if that's the way you're comfortable with working. A lot of oil painters start out with their darkest darks and then work up to the lights. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I know some of Sargent's methods, at least what he learned in the atelier, he started with the midtones and then worked his way outward to the lights and to the darks. So there's a lot of different methods to use, but overall, it could be very similar to watercolor. You can approach it in the same type of manner. It's just that you don't have to wait for any layer to dry. You can if you want to. You can definitely wait a day or two and have layers dry and then work on top of them. Watercolor actually obviously dries a lot sooner, within a few minutes. You don't have to do that. You can just work wet and wet right on top. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's definitely more forgivable. That's something I was going to mention. I mean, if anything goes wrong, you can get some water or solvent, depending on what oil paint you're using and just wipe it off. You can scratch it out with a palette knife, scrape it off, paint over it. I mean, there's so many, it's much more forgivable. So it's definitely going to be simpler, I think, just in the way that it's used, the way it's applied, its application, its handling. So definitely nothing to be afraid of. Definitely don't overthink it, don't overwork it. Just do it, have fun, and just treat it like you treat your watercolors, except it's just a different medium. You can, you know, have a thicker application of paint and just have fun, you know, just figure out what you like to do, how you like to use the paint. So anyway, I hope that was helpful, at least gave some insights between like the similarities and some differences between them. Obviously they're different mediums and they handle it differently, but there is similarities, and definitely check out some of John Singer Sargent's paintings. He has a ton of watercolors and oil paintings, and just look at the similarities in the handling and stuff, and how that can be achieved. That kind of similarity, even though it's different mediums, you could still kind of achieve the same type of effects or same type of handling. You know, it's an interesting thing, especially for me to look at. So anyway, thank you for watching. Hope this helped you out in some way. Post any comments down below. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe. Keep on painting and drawing no matter what. Don't get discouraged. Take care of yourself. Peace, my friends.